Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The hum was constant, a low maternal thrum that had become the very heartbeat of my existence. For 4 years it had been the sole constant, the only anchor in an ocean of absolute silence. The Voidfarer was my universe, a fragile bubble of steel and filtered air hurtling through the cosmic abyss, light years beyond the furthest reaches of humanity's comforting glow. My name is Eris Thorne, xenolinguist, astroacoustician, and for all intents and purposes a ghost adrift. My mission, listen. Listen for anything, for everything, for the faintest whisper that wasn't the natural cacophony of stellar nurseries or the mournful dirge of black holes. Today, like every other day, began with recycled air that tasted vaguely of ozone and stale coffee, and the sterile gleam of my console. The ship's internal temperature held steady at a cool 21 degrees Celsius, a precise testament to automated efficiency. I ran the diagnostics, checked the long-range arrays, calibrated the frequency filters, and settled into the familiar drone of static. My screens displayed an endless cascade of data. Faint radio pulses from distant galaxies, the ghostly chirps of magnetars, the ubiquitous hum of the cosmic microwave background radiation. All external, all expected. Then, a flicker. It wasn't on the primary external sensors, not the wideband or the narrow focus arrays. It was on one of the Voidfarer's internal diagnostic channels, a channel typically used to monitor structural integrity and atmospheric pressure. A tiny spike, a momentary blip, barely above the system's self-generated noise floor. I frowned, tapping my stylus against the interface. False positive, happens. The Voidfarer was a marvel of engineering, but even the best machines hiccup after years of uninterrupted operation in the vacuum. I reran the internal diagnostic sweep. The blip didn't reappear. I dismissed it, attributing it to a microseismic event within the ship's frame, perhaps a small expansion or contraction of the hull, responding to some subtle thermal gradient shift. The silence returned, profound and absolute, save for the hum. Hours passed. I analyzed data sets from a newly discovered exoplanet, trying to tease out any atmospheric chemical signatures that might suggest biological activity. The work was slow, meticulous, and often disheartening. The universe, it seemed, was spectacularly empty of anything truly interesting. Then it happened again. This time it wasn't a blip. It was a faint, almost imperceptible pattern. My fingers froze midair above the console. I had been about to scroll through a spectral analysis. The pattern was incredibly subtle, like a heartbeat heard from 3 rooms away, muffled and indistinct. It appeared on the same internal diagnostic channel, but lingered for a fraction of a second longer. A series of 3 distinct pulses, followed by a pause, then 2 more. Thump, 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 pause, thump, thump. My scientific training immediately kicked in. Reproducibility. I isolated the event, cycling the internal sensors. Nothing. I tried to backtrack the signal's origin point, but the system merely reported it as an ambient internal anomaly diffused across a general area, the aft engineering section primarily. That was unusual. Ship internal diagnostics could usually pinpoint a rattling bolt or a faulty wire down to a centimeter. I got up, stretching my cramped limbs. The Voidfarer was spacious for one man, but the confined environment still fostered a certain stiffness. I made my way through the pristine white corridors, the artificial gravity a gentle constant beneath my boots. The hum of the ship followed me, a comforting presence. Reaching the engineering section, a vast cavern of conduits, blinking lights, and the heavy pulse of the ship's fusion core, I paused. The air here was warmer, carrying the faint metallic scent of lubricant and hot electronics. I looked around, my gaze sweeping over the intricate machinery. Nothing seemed amiss. No loose panels, no flickering lights, no strange vibrations. Everything was in perfect order. I returned to my console, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I spent the next several hours running exhaustive diagnostics on the internal sensor network, cross-referencing with external monitors, searching for any possible source of interference. Solar flares, cosmic ray bursts, gravitational waves from a passing anomaly, all ruled out. The external environment was utterly pristine. The signal, however faint, was definitively internal. By the time my sleep cycle forced me to abandon my efforts, the pattern had repeated itself 3 more times, always with that distinctive thump, 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 thump. Each time it emanated from a slightly different point within the ship, always within the engineering section, but never from the exact same coordinates. It felt like trying to catch smoke. Sleep was restless. I dreamt of the hum, but in my dream it wasn't constant. It pulsed, grew louder, then softer, mimicking the pattern I'd heard. I woke with a jolt, the sterile darkness of my sleeping quarters pressing in on me, the hum the only sound. The next day the pattern intensified. It wasn't just the engineering section now. It began appearing in the cargo holds, then the hydroponics bay, then even chillingly in the adjacent research lab. It was still faint, still fleeting, but it was spreading. I began to record the occurrences, logging timestamps and approximate locations. I created a new analysis program, stripping away all known ship operational frequencies, all ambient static, focusing solely on this anomalous internal signature. What emerged on the screen was a stark, disturbing graph. The signal was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, but a strange, alien one. It had a peculiar, almost resonant quality, like something vibrating deep within the ship's structure itself. My mind raced through possibilities: structural fatigue, a microfracture resonating, but the signal was too consistent, too patterned for that. Could it be a biological contaminant? An insect or rodent somehow having survived the rigorous decontamination protocols before launch? No, the signal was acoustic, yes, but it didn't sound like scurrying or gnawing. It was a pulse. Days bled into weeks. The signal became an obsession. I neglected my primary mission data, my long-range listening arrays operating on autopilot. Every waking moment was spent hunched over my console, eyes strained, ears aching for the faintest whisper of the anomaly. The Voidfarer felt less like a protective shell and more like a sealed coffin, and something was knocking from the inside. The nature of the signal began to evolve. The simple thump-thump-thump started to incorporate subtle variations. There were periods of faster pulsing, then slower, almost as if it were responding to my increasing focus. Paranoid, I started muttering my observations aloud, testing if the signal changed. It didn't. Or if it did, I couldn't discern it. The isolation was getting to me, clearly. One evening, while charting the signal's latest appearance in the ship's central conduit system, a new element emerged. A high-frequency whine, barely audible to the human ear, overlaid the rhythmic pulses. It was incredibly faint, but it was there, and it was pure. No harmonics, no distortion. Just a perfect, unwavering tone, like a tuning fork vibrating in the void. I hooked up a pair of specialized headphones, designed to isolate and amplify microacoustic phenomena. The hum of the Voidfarer receded, replaced by an unnerving silence. I listened. For a long time there was nothing but the faint hiss of the internal systems. Then the pulse. Thump, 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 pause, thump, thump, and within it, like a shimmering thread woven through dark cloth, the high-pitched whine. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Pure, mathematical. It sounded like a lament or a greeting or a question. My hands trembled as I logged the new data. I was no longer dealing with a structural anomaly. This was communication, it had to be. But who or what was communicating and from where? I expanded my sensor network, activating every redundant internal acoustic pickup, every vibration plate, every pressure sensor. I turned the Voidfarer into a vast, resonating chamber designed to catch this internal ghost, and it worked. The signal, now clearer, stronger, was everywhere. It pulsed from the walls, resonated in the floor, vibrated in the ceiling panels. It wasn't localized to a section, it was diffused throughout the entire ship. It was like the Voidfarer itself was breathing, and the hum was its exhalation, the pulses its heartbeat. This realization plunged me into a deeper level of dread. If it was everywhere, it meant it was not an object within the ship, but perhaps something of the ship, or something that had become the ship. I tried to communicate with Earth. The lag was immense, months for a single message to traverse the gulf of space. My last transmission, a routine report on stellar dust composition, had been sent 6 months ago. I drafted a new message detailing my findings, the strange internal signal, the high-frequency tone, but as I typed, my fingers hesitated. How could I explain this? I believe my ship is talking to me, or has become possessed by a rhythmic, pure-tone entity. They'd think I'd gone space-mad. They'd initiate a psychological review, maybe even remotely disable the Voidfarer and bring me back, my mission aborted. I couldn't risk it, not yet. I needed proof. I needed answers. The signal began to incorporate more complex patterns. The high-pitched whine shifted in frequency, creating a subtle melody. The pulses varied in intensity, creating a kind of rhythmic language. I started trying to decipher it, feeding the patterns into xenolinguistic software, attempting to find repeating phrases, syntax, semantic structures. The software, designed for external, intelligent radio signals, sputtered. It couldn't make sense of the internal, resonant quality of the pulses, or the pure, non-harmonic nature of the whine. It kept returning no known linguistic match, improbable natural origin. Improbable, not impossible. I stopped showering as regularly. My beard grew straggly. The taste of ozone and coffee was now tinged with the metallic tang of fear. I ate protein paste and vitamin supplements without tasting them. My sleep became an agonizing dance between exhaustion and terror. I started to hear the signal even without my headphones, a phantom thrum beneath the ship's constant hum, a whisper just at the edge of audibility. I started talking to it. "What are you?" I'd whisper into the empty corridors, the words swallowed by the oppressive silence. "What do you want?" Sometimes I swore the signal would shift in response. A pulse would grow stronger, or the whine would rise infinitesimally in pitch. Other times, it would just continue its strange, internal symphony, utterly indifferent to my desperate pleas. The psychological toll was immense. Every shadow became a lurking presence, every creak of the ship's hull a deliberate sound. I began to distrust the ship's AI, Voyager, the gentle, sexless voice that handled routine operations. Was Voyager complicit? Was it the source? I ran diagnostics on Voyager's core programming, scoured its logs. Nothing. It was functioning perfectly, its logical algorithms unchanged. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Voyager's neutrality felt knowing. One day I experienced a genuine physical manifestation. I was in my quarters, trying to force myself to eat. The signal had been particularly active that morning, a frantic, almost agitated series of pulses and wails. As I reached for my spoon, the plate of nutrient paste on the table vibrated. Not just trembled, but visibly vibrated, the paste rippling like water. I stared, my heart hammering against my ribs. It stopped as quickly as it began. I dropped the spoon, scrambled to my console, and checked the internal seismic monitors. They showed a localized, incredibly faint vibration emanating from within my quarters, precisely where my table stood. But the vibration wasn't from the table. It was as if the very air around it had vibrated. This was no longer just auditory. This was tangible. The manifestations began to increase. Lights would flicker precisely to the rhythm of the pulses. Cold spots would appear, chilling the air around me for a few agonizing seconds, only to vanish. Objects, small and light, would occasionally slide a millimeter across a surface, as if nudged by an unseen hand. It was never violent, never overt, always subtle, always ambiguous enough to make me doubt my own sanity. I tried to capture these phenomena on camera, setting up high-definition recorders. But the signals were too fleeting, the manifestations too delicate. The cameras would only capture a slight blurring, a momentary dimming, easily dismissed as lens flare or power fluctuations. My proof remained stubbornly intangible. The signal's vocabulary grew. It started weaving in patterns that mimicked human speech. Not words, not phonemes, but the rhythm of speech, the rise and fall of intonation. It sounded like someone was whispering just beyond a closed door, the meaning just out of reach, maddeningly tantalizing. I found myself tracing the internal conduits, running my hand along the cold metal bulkheads, trying to feel the vibrations directly. The ship was no longer just a vessel, it was a living, breathing, speaking entity, and it was speaking to me. One terrifying night, I awoke to find my quarters plunged into an unnatural silence. The hum of the Voidfarer, my lifelong companion, was gone. Absolute, terrifying silence. My heart seized. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the emergency lights. The silence amplified my ragged breathing, the frantic thumping of my own pulse. I checked the environmental controls, all systems online, power nominal, yet the hum was gone. Then from the depths of that profound silence, a single, clear, resonant pulse emanated from the very walls of my room. It wasn't the distant thrum I'd been hearing on the sensors. This was here. It vibrated through the floor into my bare feet, up my legs, into my bones. Thum, it hung in the air, a deep, pervasive vibration that seemed to penetrate my skull. Then the high-pitched whine, rising in intensity, not a melody now, but a single, piercing note that made my teeth ache. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, the pulse and the whine, before fading back into the oppressive silence. And then the Voidfarer's hum returned, soft at first, then building back to its familiar, monotonous drone. I stood there, trembling, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. It had done this deliberately. It had silenced the ship to make me listen, to make me feel it. I lost track of the days. My logs became less scientific, more a desperate stream of consciousness. Entry 457. The whispers are clearer. Not words, not yet, but the cadence, the emotional weight. It's sad sometimes, other times something akin to curiosity. And now anger, entry 462. I tried to shut off internal sensors, all of them. Just to get some peace, Voyager AI overrode the command. Dr. Thorne, internal diagnostics are critical for structural integrity. Please confirm shutdown request. I canceled. Was it Voyager, or the thing within Voyager? Entry 469. It started to mimic my thoughts. Not directly, but I'll think of a particular sequence of numbers or a fragment of an old Earth song, and the signal will respond, shaping its pulses and tones to mirror the rhythm, the numerical pattern. It's inside my head, it knows what I'm thinking. The terrifying realization dawned on me. The signals weren't just coming from inside the ship, they were coming from everywhere, and from me. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting shadows that solidified into nothing when I turned to face them. My reflection in the viewport seemed wrong sometimes, the eyes too wide, too haunted, too knowing. I retreated to my personal quarters, a self-imposed quarantine. I tried to cut off all communication, even with the ship's AI. I wrapped myself in blankets, trying to muffle the pervasive hum, the subtle vibrations that now seemed to course through my very blood. But there was no escape. The Voidfarer was a cage, and the thing inside it had found its way into my mind. The signal began to speak in a new way. It took the fundamental elements of my own thoughts, my memories, my fears, my name, and translated them into its strange, resonant language. I'd remember my mother's face, and the signal would weave a pattern of warmth and sorrow. I'd recall the vast emptiness of space, and it would resonate with an unimaginable cold, and sometimes it would pulse my name. Aris, 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 not spoken but vibrated, felt in the marrow of my bones. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that I was being assimilated. Not physically, not yet, but my mind was a conduit, a receiver, an echo chamber for this omnipresent entity. It wasn't just in the ship, it was the ship, and now it was becoming me. One morning I stared at my reflection in the polished surface of my console screen. My face was gaunt, my eyes sunken and bloodshot, but something else was different. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran beneath my skin, an internal vibration that mirrored the pulses of the ship. I could feel it in my jaw and my fingertips, a resonance that was growing stronger, deeper. I was no longer just listening to the signal. I was generating it. I raised a hand, examining it. It felt alien, heavy. The skin looked the same, but beneath it, something was profoundly altered. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the bulkhead. I heard the hum, yes. But I also heard a familiar rhythm, the thump-thump-thump, a thump-thump pattern, emanating not from the ship, but from my own chest. My heart had started to mimic the signal. A terrifying clarity washed over me. The signal wasn't just observing me. It was learning from me. It was adapting, and it was preparing, for what I could only guess, but the dread was absolute. I walked through the empty corridors of the Voidfarer, no longer needing sensors. I felt the ship. I felt its vast, cold emptiness, its immense journey. I felt the intricate dance of its systems, the flow of power, the circulation of air. And beneath it all, I felt the pervasive, rhythmic pulse, no longer alien, but inextricably linked to my own being. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the air, and in me. The silence of space was not empty, I realized. It was pregnant with a quiet, unimaginable terror. And I, Eris Thorne, the listener, had finally found what I was searching for. It hadn't come from the distant stars. It had been here all along, a dormant parasite, waiting for a host, waiting for an interpreter, waiting for a mind to crack open its impossible language. My last conscious thought before the complete immersion was a horrifying certainty. The signal hadn't appeared in the Voidfarer. The Voidfarer had simply sailed into it. And now, the ship and I, we were one. The Voidfarer continued its silent journey through the deep void, a lone beacon hurtling towards an unknown destination. From within its sleek, silent hull, a new signal began to emanate. Not the routine broadcasts of a human mission, but a rhythmic pulse, overlaid with a pure, high-frequency whine. It was a language without words, a song without melody, a message of profound, cosmic horror. And within that signal, faintly echoing like a ghost in a machine, was the resonant vibration of a single name repeated endlessly. Aris, Aris, Aris. The ship was no longer listening. It was broadcasting. And something out there in the silent, waiting darkness was finally listening back.